Europa Universalis 5 features approximately a bazillion playable factions at the 1337 start date, giving you a wide selection to choose from. Today, we're going to look at the first 100 years of the game through the lens of a little-known country known as England. One of the most content-rich nations in the game, boasting 31 country bonuses and a whopping 233 dynamic historical events. In 1337, it's on the precipice of a lengthy, possibly centuries-long, war with France. Between continental ambitions in France, the upcoming age of colonialism, and extracurricular activities available in Scotland and Ireland, you have plenty of goals to strive for as England. By the end of the 100 years, I will evaluate the experience along the following lines. Unique content and flavor, or how much did I feel like I was playing as England versus playing, just some generic nation. Possibility, did I have options during my playthrough, or was I railroaded into only having one path to success? And finally, would I continue? Are there things left to do, or am I pretty much just coasting and clicking buttons? The vast majority of this playthrough was done on the 1.08 beta patch, vanilla Iron Man mode, although I think at some point it did switch to 1.09, but I don't think there was a huge difference there. If I had started this playthrough later, I would have had numerous buffs to England from the 1.0.100.1 whatever patch that was. They gave England way more levies, and they tweaked the 100 Years' War, but I'm not about to record all of that again, so you have a slightly older, consider this hard mode. Consider this the Radon from Elden Ring before they patched him version of the 100 Years' War England experience. Before we unpause, let's take stock of England. England is under the rule of King Edward III, member of the Plantagenet dynasty. His stats reflect what you're likely to do with him: crush your enemies and then administer their former lands. London is absolutely juiced with a large population, coastal location, and market center to help you make money. England is somewhat unique in that it has access to sink ports, which give them an actual supply of sailors as opposed to the government-subsidized fishing villages that other nations need to rely on. You can use your navy to bump up maritime presence in nearby water tiles to cut down on proximity cost to your capital, helping you bypass some of the early woes of proximity and control. It's 1337, I have Welsh subjects of dubious loyalty, a fractured Scotland to my north, and French territory I must reclaim for the crown. Technically, at the start of this playthrough, I am just minding my business when France decides they want some guy named Rob, but I am not handing Rob over. France responds by mean mugging me with about 70,000 troops across the English Channel. 74,000, are they just trying to... Sorry, John. It was a little too exciting for you and you've passed away. Why are there 72,000 Frenchmen? I consider sending over Rob, but no. I declare war on France in what is sure to be a quick and decisive conflict. The first phase of the 100 Years' War is an agonizing affair in which France and England bleed each other dry, fighting over a small chunk of land just across the channel. After a slugfest, I agree to take Aumale, Boulogne, and St. Paul as dominions, Calais as direct annexation, and France's lunch money for good measure. It is at this moment that I have to address the elephant in the room. During the entirety of this playthrough, I was ignorant of the claim French throne peace treaty condition. It is just kind of nestled between all of the ways that you can subjugate France's subjects, and so I completely missed it. It's a way easier way to win the 100 Years' War than what I'm about to do, which is basically brute force, take their subjects and take their land from them, and then force them to acknowledge that my presence in France is legit. So that's just a quick aside. I am basically doing the 100 Years' War on hard mode. While a lesser monarch would take many years to recuperate and rebuild the realm a bit after this conflict, King Edward yearns for violence on the continent. I intervene in the first war of, hold on, I have to look this up, Anosian succession? I assist Halibut, Holland, and both halves of Bavaria against France. I initially panic because of the massive armies stomping near my newly acquired holdings, but I managed to weave my armies into advantageous spots and win the fair fights, or stack wipe the vassal armies that wander too close to my main force. Luckily for me, I don't have that problem, because my vassals don't know how to use boats, so their troops just sit idly by on the isles, cheering me on. Hainaut eventually gets white peace, which I consider a win since I've blocked French influence in the area. Seems like Hainaut is my counterweight to the French-aligned Flanders. During the war, the stannery courts are built. This is very funny because the button to agree to it says it only costs 15 ducats, but then they slip in the line that the courts will be built in other locations too, which means it costs more than 15. It's closer to 150 in total, and I get to take out my first loan of the campaign. Settling in after the war, I get to properly focus on building up England. I pay off the loans soon enough, work on improving relations with my vassals, build a bunch of buildings that you don't care about, and the Black Death is here.
Is that the Grim Reaper?
I build some hospitals in Prey, which is probably period accurate. In the midst of this panic, Edward the Black reaches adulthood. I can't wait to see what he's dead too. Died of disease, if you can believe it. To make myself feel better and to block Scottish expansion into Ireland, I intervene in a war between Scotland and Clandeboy. I spend the war bullying Scotland's forces and sieging down their castles. I'm not war leader, so I don't get to dictate the terms, but I'm in it for the love of the game. The Isles and Moray both get freed from the Scottish yoke, and the victorious Allied forces get to split the plunder between us. Another period of peace settles in, giving me time to build up my economy, annex some of the Welsh vassals, construct government-subsidized fishing villages, and invent tennis. I would like to take this time to mention that I am skipping over a significant number of historical flavor events that England gets. They are somewhat immersive, but I feel like a lot of them are pretty negligible. Many have to do with culture and artists, which I feel isn't a very fleshed out part of the game, at least not yet. Other events involve border raids with Scotland, which is a little bit more interesting, but it doesn't actually have that big of an impact or make you feel like there's some urgency to the situation on the northern border. I'm a little unimpressed, and it makes that big content number at the selection screen feel inflated. Anyway, I invest in a castle at Calais, and France makes me look like an idiot by declaring war for Aquitaine instead. In the initial scramble to organize my troops, I noticed that transporting 23 guys, yes, 23 individual soldiers on one boat does not work. Either these are some massive lads, tiny boats, both, or John Paradox needs to fix his damn game. At one point, I have one of the French armies engaged in a battle that I am handily winning, and I just misclick? Like, I don't know if some sort of ghost possessed me for a second, a French specter manipulating my nervous system, or some Parisian mind control device was fired at my brain. I don't know. I probably just twitched due to the high octane action. I'm technically up 27% on war score, but my army is simply too diminished to keep fighting. I finally get caught by one of those smaller French armies that I would not have had any problems fighting earlier in the war, and I'm forced to retreat across the channel and regroup. I lower and then re-raise my levies, ready to send another crop of Englishmen to their doom. France actually interrupts the landing, crashing into the army before I can coalesce my forces. Having higher morale, better terrain, and last-minute reinforcements from the sea helped me win the battle, but it is again a costly victory. I actually took 1,000 more casualties than the French, and I see why when the victory screen pops up. They had 1,100 horsemen versus my measly 360. The French cavalry advantage is going to ruin me if this continues. The saving grace of this war is the fact that anywhere between a third and a half of the enemy forces spend their time down in Aquitaine. This gives me some breathing room up north as I am not quite as hopelessly outnumbered as I could be, and my ally Aragon to the south actually manages to occupy territory every once in a while. Eventually, I get away with just paying France for peace. It's not ideal, but I didn't lose any territory. Since we no doubt have decades of bloodshed in front of us, I figure we need all hands on deck, and I have the Welsh become an accepted culture. I believe this should allow me to draw more of the Welsh population into my armies if I need to. I figure this can't hurt, and I am wrong, as accepting the Welsh has put me over the accepted cultures threshold. What a phrase. On top of not checking peace treaty conditions, I am also bad at math and I did not run the numbers. Whatever, this is a learning experience and I am ride or die with the Welsh now. To cheer myself up from this misstep, I intervene in another Scots-Irish war. There's much humiliation and lunch money extracted. Speaking of money, I realize I'm actually at economic parity with France. Sure, the manpower difference and their swarm of vassals that can actually contribute to the war effort is a bit of a problem, but I take some solace in the fact that I have managed to build up my economy enough to be on even footing with them. The French detect that I'm feeling good about this and pull their own pope out of their rear ends and start collecting more tithes than the original pope, causing their income to nearly double. Thank you, Western Schism. On our current trajectory, France will be able to reinvest that money back into their economy and then become a runaway freight train that I cannot hope to catch up with. They have larger, friendlier vassals that they can easily integrate into their realm as the clock ticks by. As the smaller, poorer country, I have to find some kind of edge here. Luckily, there's a fairly reliable key to military success, at least in this patch: armories. Once a nation embraces the professional armies institution, they can begin to work towards the armories tech, which allows you to build armories and finally increase your manpower beyond what the sergeantry in your capital produces. From there, you can start recruiting standing troops, which can absolutely shred levies, which will make up for most, if not all, of the armies running around. So the plan is to beeline for armories, pray France hasn't done the same thing, and hammer away at them with professional troops until the French juggernaut begins to falter. I notice that France is embroiled in some random war in Central Europe and decide to pounce. They're also rocking like -18 stability, which seems crazy to me that they're just fine with that. I'm able to pretty freely siege up north while Aragon, my ally, just sits there along the border, I guess. Eventually, the French send the spawn of Satan himself after me, though. General Simon. He's an absolutely cracked general that can beat anyone that I put in charge, even old King Edward III. The battle preview indicates that I'll lose a head-to-head fight, but I still give it a shot since it has lied to me before. We have higher morale, as well as the terrain benefit, but the French have 2,000 cavalry versus my 200. I hope for another miracle, and instead we take embarrassing losses. I read the writing on the wall and order a retreat. Less than a year later, King Edward III passes away, probably due to embarrassment, and King William III ascends to the throne. While he's less of a general than his father, his stats are in the mid-80s across the board, which is fantastic. I regroup my levies, hire mercenaries, and put a new general in charge, and we run it back against Simon. The French center collapses, allowing us to defeat what should have been the better army. This was the end of French good fortunes during this war. The remainder of it is some grueling battles in the north, while Aragon and Aquitaine start picking off castles and border settlements. We finally sign a peace deal, giving a single location to Aragon and a whopping 2 to England. I hope by doing this, tensions would remain high between Aragon and France, and I would be able to count on Aragon for future conflict. Chaucer spawns in and gives us the Canterbury Tales, which will probably be amazing when art actually matters in this game. The real work of art, though? Armories. I start sprinkling them in any province that can have them, along with other economic buildings. I do feel like outside of London, I am somewhat neglecting the country, focused almost entirely on countless upcoming battles with France. On one hand, yeah, I am suffering a bit of tunnel vision here. On the other hand, guns! As long as I keep recruiting more soldiers, my gunsmiths will hire people and make tons of money. Surely having an economic incentive to constantly produce weaponry for wars would not have any horrible consequences. Video games! In 1384, I declare what will be the 5th war against France, this time guest starring Bohemia! At this point, battles are pretty easy, regulars shred levies, especially my heavy cavalry. While I'm celebrating my wins, the Lollard heresy spawns. You see, he has the audacity to suggest that translating the Bible and letting average people read and understand it is a good idea. I actually go the ahistorical route and tolerate Wycliffe, since I have had my fair share of headaches from the Catholic Church so far. This damages relations with most of Western Europe, but quite frankly, Western Europe has not done much for me anyway. If things get bad enough, I might just ditch Catholicism and jump aboard the Wycliffe train. I get a major event pop-up prominently featuring the Scottish flag, terrifying me, since my armies are currently occupied in northern France. I breathe a sigh of relief, though, as I read the words, "Their war is not our concern." The good news doesn't stop there. My horrendous heir, Edward, dies in a hunting accident, making little Richard the new heir. I immediately start giving him an expensive education, although at 12 years old, he's already better than some of my adult statesmen. The war in France winds down with a corridor of land stretching from my possessions down to Paris now occupied. I know in my heart that I cannot actually extract anything useful from this land directly, and that I should create vassals to manage it, but vanity and paranoia get me to keep the land. Vanity in my assertion that Paris should always directly be under English control, and paranoia that the 100 Years' War event chain might have something nice for me if England controls the old French capital. Tragically, I am not actually ride or die with the Welsh, and I remove them as an accepted culture because I feel I both want to make room for other cultures that are going to come along with territories gained at France's expense, and I'd like to be operating without any penalties anymore. To give my nation a sense of normalcy in this trying time, I intervene in a war between Scotland and half of Ireland. The Isle of Man is no longer a vassal, Moray and Galloway gain independence, and more Scottish lunch money enters the local economy. Aside from a brief adventure in Portugal for my professional army and the construction of some roads, not much happens between the Scottish War and the ascension of Richard II. His stats are much worse than his father's, but he has inherited a much better position geopolitically. Wycliffe's Bible gets published because I still want the Lollard option to be on the table should I need it, and Chaucer is poor now? Apparently he made some bad investments, and now one of the greatest authors we've seen is requesting about 10 months' income of the entire Kingdom of England to bail him out. Tragically, Chaucer suffers a fate worse than death and joins the commoner's estate. To finish the trifecta of domestic upheaval, I make Francian and Picard tolerated cultures. I get another institute reform slot, and after some hand-wringing, I decide to go with plutocratic ethos. I wanted to start moving more towards the burghers rather than the nobility. If I wanted to play optimally, I probably would have gone with feudal nobility, since I'm likely to pick up many more subjects in my wars in France. Speaking of France, it is still not settled. Before pressing my oh-so-delicious 100 Years' War claims, I notice there's a pleasant orange nation quite close by. The Netherlands? The AI actually formed the Netherlands? I ally with them, beg Parliament to let me have larger levies, and we go to war once again. At this point, I'll save you the play-by-play. There's a lot of tedium in these wars, with my armies being fairly unstoppable when grouped together, but I occasionally split troops up or have to run around chasing France and its allies around. Given the grueling pace of sieges and my lack of support from vassals, it just takes a while. But the peace deal includes something that might help with that. Normandy is going to flip from being a French subject to an English one. Normandy regularly outperformed pretty much every French vassal I saw in these wars so far, actually posing a threat on occasion. Flipping them removes a thorn from my side and sticks it into France's instead. While campaigning in northern France has kind of lost its spark, I delight in rescuing whatever small realm Scotland tries conquering. This time I ride to the rescue of Galloway, although I'm not entirely doing this out of the goodness of my heart. I take a few pieces of land, humiliate Scotland, and demand war reparations. While I was busy knocking the stuffing out of Scotland, the Western Schism was resolved. No more tithes for France, and the Hussite Wars have kicked off, with the Papal States going to war with Bohemia and France. As both a Lollard sympathizer and a #1 France hater, I feel very conflicted. The Pope nudges me in the right direction though by excommunicating the French king, giving me another juicy reason to go to war. This is pretty much more of the same, with the single highlight of the war being Normandy easily fending off a Castilian army over twice their size. Another massive chunk is taken out of France, with much of it becoming subjects afterwards. I'm now in a race against time though, as it's already 1411. If I'm limiting myself to the first 100 years of an England playthrough, I've got only a few more decades to resolve the 100 Years' War situation. I enter the Plantagenet flow state, accepting Francian as an accepted culture, building infrastructure in France, and actually using a bit of my brain when it comes to internal development. This isn't enough to keep everyone happy though, and a civil war is sparked by a noble-led faction centered on Paris. This faction isn't necessarily difficult to defeat, but it is a chore sieging their castles. In hindsight, this is a common issue that I run into, and I really should have considered recruiting cannons to speed this process along after I'd finished the actual fighting portion of wars. It's 1416 and I am beginning to panic. The casus belli that the 100 Years' War generates is somewhat random when it is given to you, so I'm snatching any chances to go to war when I can. I declare on France, this time with my war goal sent to Champagne, rather than the usual beat France in battles and watch the number climb war goal I've been used to. I obliterate France, Bohemia makes a guest appearance, and more of land is stripped away. I have a hilarious realization that my king has the malevolent trait, which decreases subject loyalty, right as I'm about to create several subjects to help administer my new lands. But what if I told you that there was something even worse that increased my subjects' disloyalty? You see, way back when Normandy was still under the French yoke, I used covert actions to agitate for liberty, forcing France to either have a disloyal subject or spend resources making sure they stay loyal. That's all well and good, but Normandy is my vassal now, and is still receiving agitation for liberty from me. Outside of literally releasing a subject and then subjugating them again, I don't think there's an in-game way to fix this. Oh, and I guess I was almost cooed. It didn't actually hurt anyone though, so that was neat. As the twilight of my campaign approaches, I assess the situation. It's 1425, giving me 12 years to snatch away 7 more provinces in France. I'm eyeing an advance that gives me access to recruitment law, but I don't think I can implement it in a timely fashion. I need to think about this carefully. To clear my head, I take a stroll up to Scotland and tell them to stop fighting the Isle of Man. They scream profanities at me, and once again I become the tormentor of the Scottish people. I marshal my forces at Cockermouth. Nobody laugh at that. That's a real place apparently. And after the initial push into Scottish territory, peace is rapidly secured. Man actually seizes a bunch of Scottish land. It's fascinating to watch the different ways Scotland can fracture and cede land to the minor countries around it. While I'm trying to decide my next move and get a CB that will work against France, they declare war on me with the 100 Years' War CB. They have given me what I want on a silver platter. Each war with France has followed a familiar pattern thus far. I hustle in the north, fending off a swarm of French-aligned forces that seem innumerable, laying siege when I have a chance. France and its allies, in turn, lay siege to holdings in Aquitaine and leave it in varying states of devastation. Aquitaine really is the unsung hero of this playthrough. I have enough troops to maintain a solid presence in the north with a large levy army supplemented by token regular troops, while a larger army, mostly of regulars, heads south to relieve Bordeaux. My commander is better, my quality is better, and we have terrain advantage. I stack more paper, my clothes are more fly. It is an apocalyptically bad situation for France, as it has focused the majority of its fortifications in the north, leaving their soft underbelly exposed. Another French army in the north is attempting to ambush my allies in Flemish territory. My forces arrive late, but manage to salvage the battle. On all fronts, meaningful French resistance has crumbled. In 1429, the French are forced to cede a massive chunk of land to England and a few locations in Aquitaine. I nervously check the requirements to end the 100 Years' War, and once again, I'm panicking. I see the check marks, and I pray that I'm reading it correctly. Nothing has popped up yet, no significant change can be detected. Then it appears a few days later. I had assumed it would appear either immediately or when the month finally rolled over, but there it is. England wins the 100 Years' War. Wait. 20 prestige? 20 prestige? That's it? What sort of drink more Ovaltine situation is this, Paradox? I take a deep breath and I try to focus on the positives here. When I was looking at the Form New Countries tab, I noticed that Great Britain couldn't be formed during the 100 Years' War. Well, that's over now, so let's just take a look and... Oh. Scotland can't be allowed to exist anymore. Well, without a solid CB on hand to completely take over Scotland, I settle for fabricating one that lets me get some good hits in. And I finally start dedicating more resources to having multiple boat patrols around England, hopefully bringing up my control by reducing proximity costs through maritime presence. I cannot emphasize enough that I probably should have been doing this sooner. In 1433, with 4 years left on the clock, I torment Scotland one last time. It's an eventful war for one so late in the campaign. Normandy demonstrates that they are simply built different by managing a naval invasion of Scotland. Dunbar Castle falls to my siege, and in less than a year, Scotland finds multiple countries breaking away from it, almost all of its forts being demolished, humiliation, and the last of its lunch money taken. Little did I know, this war was the one thing saving me from total and utter disaster. As I rolled from March into April, a familiar sight popped up on my screen. Civil War! But this wasn't the puny Parisian rebellion of the past. Outside of the southeast and central eastern portions of England, pretty much everything was in rebel hands. The majority of my castles were occupied. All of the French possessions that were controlled by the crown directly have been lost. And since this is a civil war, vassals are not going to intervene. King Richard II, for all of his flaws, manages to wrest control of England from the rebels and limit their presence to a few isolated castles in Wales and northern England. He dies in the siege of Carnarvon, his equally mediocre son John II taking the throne. John II is Irish, strangely enough, although he decides that isn't a good political move, and he metamorphosizes into an Englishman through means that we still can't understand. As English allies slowly make their way over to my continental holdings in order to help in the Civil War, the Age of Discovery dawns. It is 1473, I have Welsh subjects of dubious loyalty, a fractured Scotland to my north, and French territory I must reclaim for the crown. Alright, so now that that's concluded, let's get into the evaluation of the experience, as well as some reflections on my actions. I would like to again acknowledge my suboptimal plays, some for roleplay purposes, and some due to actual lack of knowledge. There's the whole aforementioned not knowing that there's a claim throne treaty condition, which probably would have ended the 100 Years' War a decade or two earlier, at least. My brain had turned to jelly at that point due to all the micromanaging though, so again, I ask for your forgiveness. My decision to tunnel vision on France and control too much territory there that I really had no business controlling was more of a roleplay decision. I actually think it's a point in this campaign's favor that I was so drawn in. I really did feel like an English monarch who was obsessing over this conflict and had no concept of the sunk cost fallacy. For unique content and flavor evaluation, I think England was actually more underwhelming than I expected. As I had said in the play-by-play, a lot of these events almost feel meaningless, just kind of clutter that inflates that number at the nation selection screen. Some of these, like those involving artists and writers, might feel more impactful as art and culture becomes more important. Others, though, like deciding random legal cases that give negligible pop happiness or discontent, just feel like a chore. EU5 already throws a lot of chores at you, but luckily you can automate the ones that you don't find terribly fun. With these English pop-ups, you have to read them over because some of them can be of consequence, but other ones are like, hey, here's a somewhat well-known monk. What university is he gonna lecture about vegetables at for 2 years before he kicks the bucket? Out of all the England-specific events that were going on, the only ones that really stuck with me were the 100 Years' War CB event because, I kind of needed that, and the Wycliffe ones because the idea of switching religions this early on was kind of interesting, and I'll probably try it in another playthrough. With my limited frame of reference, as I've really only dedicated myself to a handful of campaigns at this depth, I'd give this experience a strong B in the area of flavor and uniqueness. Even with my gripes about some of the more inconsequential events, there still were some pretty good flavor events, some mechanical differences, and the geography of the area lends itself to a certain play style and certain challenges, and at the end of the day, I was consumed by a hatred of France, so I'd say that's pretty good. For possibilities and alternative paths, I think this campaign absolutely shined. As I played, there were several moments where I had to stop and consider which path I'd like to go down. While I found myself throwing immense resources into the fight for France, I could have just as easily reconciled with France and focused on Scotland, Ireland, or both. In France, I could have delegated far more power to my subjects and led a more decentralized nation. On the religious front, I could have sided with France during the schism if I had reconciled, or I could have opened up a whole new can of worms by switching to Lollardy. Even in regards to infrastructure, I had begun pumping money into building a port city across the channel to cut down on proximity and help increase control. That money could have gone to the aforementioned boat patrols that I had started towards the end of the campaign. I'm constantly asking myself, what if during this campaign, and I think that's fantastic. I'll give it an A. That might be strong considering this is my first review of this type, but it feels right. Finally, would I continue? Absolutely. By no means was I coasting. As a matter of fact, I was almost annoyed that I was somewhat rushing to get this review out, therefore rushing both in-game and in real life. I'm tempted to both continue this playthrough and start my own again, where I'm a bit more deliberate, explore new paths, while also not driving my nation towards a massive civil war. With all this considered, I'd recommend England to players who are familiar with the genre, or maybe even a newer player that has gotten a few reps in with other nations. It can be a little overwhelming, and some of the quirks of EU5 are holding it back a bit, but there is so much to do for a player unafraid to meddle in the affairs of their neighbors, while also giving more peaceful players a large nation to develop economically. Give it a try, let me know how it goes, and to you experienced players out there, I'm sure your playthrough went much better. Please do not rub my nose in it too much. Thank you to everyone who stuck around this late into the video. Check out the link tree in the description if you want to see more of my stuff, or if you want to hang out in the Discord. Oh, and be sure to comment what other countries you'd like to see me try like the first 100 years of, whether you think it's a good fit and you want me to kind of spread the good word, or if it's a country you haven't tried before and you're sending me out into the minefield. I'm down for either one. Okay, bye.